In this nugget, we're going to take a look at how we can use the refresh option with a linked clone to set that Delta OS disk back to the way it was at the very beginning, back to square one. Let's jump in. One of the common sayings that I hear around my house is, why don't you leave it like you found it? And normally that's directed to one or more children, but in the world of virtual machines, we can do the same thing. For example, let's say we have a linked clone, and with a linked clone we have the base disk, and that's our replica. And from the VM's point of view, that is a read-only operation from the base disk. And then we also have a Delta disk for the operating system, so any changes that need to get written, the VM can read and write from this Delta disk. And in addition to that, we can also have persistent disks, as well as non-persistent disks, available to that linked clone as it's running. Now, here's the beauty of this. If the user, for example, installs applications or puts files on the hard drive, for example, the C drive of his Windows computer on this linked clone, those changes are effectively going to be on this C drive and in more detail on this Delta disk. So what we could do is we could set up a virtual machine so that every time the user logs off, it automatically goes for a refresh. And what the refresh is, it effectively sets the Delta disk back to its starting point, as if the user had never made any changes to that C drive. So in an environment where users log on and when they log off, every single time we want to refresh or like revert back to the snapshot it was when they started, at the pool level, we can specify that's what we want to happen. When you log off, it'll do a refresh. Another option that we have is we can go into the pool as a whole and say, you know what? I want to go ahead and do a refresh of all the linked clones associated with this pool. And again, that's done through View Administrator, and that'll be communicated over to vCenter along with Composer, and they will refresh every single virtual machine as if it was a brand new virtual machine and there was no changes that the user had made to a Delta disk. Now, the cool thing is, even if we do a refresh, the information on the persistent disk, for example, Bob has a D drive and he's been writing to and reading from the D drive, even if we do a refresh, it's only going to affect the Delta disk for the operating system. It's not going to affect our persistent disk. So Bob's information, including his profile, which may be saved on that persistent disk, will survive a refresh that's being done to the Delta disk. So in my current topology, we've got a user named Lois. She is successfully connected to the connection server, and using a pool of linked clones, she's connected to a virtual machine. And that's where we will, in this nugget, pick it up. We'll create some changes on the C drive of Lois's virtual machine, and then we'll force a refresh and see that whatever changes she had made to that C drive are completely gone. It's as if she had never made those changes to begin with after that refresh happens to the linked clones. So we're sitting here at this purple desktop, this lavender desktop, which is the physical computer that Lois is sitting in front of. We launched the VMware Horizon View client. We can go ahead and customize our options if we want to. For example, we have it set for login as current user. That's great. So we'll go ahead and double click on the icon for our connection server. Here are all the pools that Lois is entitled to use. If we take a look at our settings, we can specify that for the link clone pool, we want a small window. That looks great. So we'll click on OK. And then let's go ahead and connect to a resource in that linked clone pool. And there it is. And we're logged on as Lois. Now currently on our desktop, we have this folder called From Linked Clone Pool. And that's a visual reminder of where we're at. And her user profile, including her desktop, are being stored on a persistent disk. To confirm that, let's open up Explorer. And in Explorer, let's go ahead and take a look at what drives we have. We have our C drive, we have our D drive, which is our persistent disk. And on this persistent disk is where Lois's profile is being stored. So what I think would be a great test is let's go to the C drive. Now in a fresh state, this C drive, all that data is being stored as part of the replica, and it's being shared across all the linked clones. So if we made a change to the C drive, for example, let's right click, we'll say new, and let's create a new folder. And let's create a folder called Weird Folder that stands out. And that way it will be very easy to recognize. And that new folder, the information for that is in the OS Delta disk associated with this virtual machine. And that's because the base image, the replica image, is a read-only copy from this VM's perspective. Next, let's take a look at View Administrator and just verify a couple of settings for this pool regarding the auto refresh at logoff. So here in View Administrator, let's go ahead under Inventory and expand Catalog and select Desktop Pools. There's our 4 pools. And here we're focused primarily on our linked clone pool. And from the inventory, if we go under Resources and select Machines, it'll give us the status of our current machines. I'm going to sort these based on the desktop pool by clicking that. It'll sort by that column. And also, I'm going to take this status column over here on the right and drag it over so it shows up a little bit more left in the display. So regarding linked VM01, currently it's connected, and currently the user called Lois is associated with that VM. And that's because we have auto assignment set for this pool. If we want to look at the details for that pool, we can simply click on the pool here. It'll take us to the details for that specific pool. And over here on the right for this pool called link clone pool, regarding refresh OS disk on logoff, it is set to never. That means it's not automatically going to refresh the OS disk, the Delta disk, for each of the VMs when the users log off. However, what we can do as administrators is we can go ahead with this pool selected, and we can click on this button called View Composer, and here, my friend, we have the option of doing a refresh. So from this dropdown, if we click on refresh, it first asks, when do you want to do it? And by default, it is showing the current date and time. However, I could schedule that for a future time. And then it's asking, when you do this refresh, do you want to force users to log off, or do you want to wait for users to log off? And we can also set up some warning messages about what's going to happen. So in our example, because this is a controlled lab environment, and I know there's only one user currently connected, let's go ahead and use the force option. We'll click on next. It's giving us a summary of what's about to happen, including the fact that this message will be sent out to anybody who's currently connected. They're given a 5-minute warning, and this refresh is going to affect 3 virtual machines. And that's because currently we have 3 linked clones that were created and are associated with this pool. So let's go ahead and click on Finish. And then if we go back to Lois's desktop, here she has a pop-up message saying, your desktop is scheduled for an important update and will shut down in 5 minutes. So like that guy from the Star Wars cartoons who introduces every episode. In any event, please save any unsaved work now. So we'll click on OK. And let me go ahead and close the Explorer. And what the heck, I'll just go ahead and go to Options. And we'll say disconnect and log off. We're done with our work. And that will save us from it booting us off in about 5 minutes from now. And we'll say OK to confirm. So now if we go back to Horizon View Administrator, check this out. Linked VM01 currently shows as in maintenance mode. And at the end of the day, any Delta disks that had been modified, those are going to be refreshed to square one, back to the way it was originally. And as we go back to vSphere, the web client, let's take a look at the recent tasks that vSphere is reporting. So it's doing the work, it's doing the configuration to restore the Delta disks back to the way they were originally, before any changes had been made to those disks. And let's go ahead and click on refresh. And we'll give it a moment to finish. And then we'll go back to Lois's desktop. We'll reconnect and verify whether or not the changes that we had made, logged in as Lois to the C drive, to see whether or not those are still there, or has it been restored with a refresh back to the way it was originally. So a few minutes have gone by. Let's go ahead back to Lois's physical computer where she's currently sitting, and we'll launch the Horizon client. We'll go ahead and connect to our connection server. Here are the 4 pools that Lois is entitled to use. We'll go ahead and double click on the icon for the linked clone pool. And that's going to whisk us away through time and space to our linked clone that Lois is going to use. And check it out. So our background is still orange. That's great. We still have our folder called From Linked Clone Pool. That's great. And again, the reason that this is here is because our profile is all stored on the persistent disk and not as a part of the Delta OS disk for this VM that we just refreshed. So now the question is that folder that we created previously on the C drive, is it still there? Well, let's find out. Let's open up Explorer, and we'll go down to the C drive. And on the C drive, you'll notice that that weird folder that we created, poof, it is gone. And that would also be the case for any applications or other changes that had been made to the C drive that were kept in the OS Delta disk and are now reset after the refresh we did for all of our linked clones. In this nugget, we've demonstrated how we can use a refresh in combination with a linked clone to set that OS Delta disk for each VM back to square number 1. I've had a great time in this nugget. I'm glad that you joined me for it. I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.